Hey, what's going on, guys? TheHORRORman back talking about one of my favorite topics, slashers. About 2 years ago, I uploaded a video asking the question, what makes a slasher film a slasher film? After that, I created the Slashback Challenge, with one of the intentions being to answer that question. And now, a year and a half into Slashback, we still don't have a definitive answer. It seems that slasher films are subjective in a way. I've seen a lot of movies reviewed during the Slashback Challenge that I personally have never considered to be slashers, but other people do. So in this video, once again I ask, what makes a slasher film a slasher film? And not only that, but what was the first slasher film? I would say the majority of people, when asked that question, would say Psycho. It's Alfred Hitchcock's classic, just about everyone has seen it, and many people consider it to be the first slasher film ever. I mean, it makes sense. It's definitely a slasher film, and it was released in 1960. And by the way, guys, I know some of you are probably thinking Psycho is not a slasher film, it's a proto-slasher. Well, guys, they're the same thing. A proto-slasher is a word used to describe a movie that was a slasher film before the term slasher film was invented. They're the same thing. The thing is, though, there was another slasher film, or proto-slasher film, released earlier that year in 1960. Michael Powell's Peeping Tom. And those of us who know about this one and have seen it usually consider this to be the very first slasher film. But let's go back a little further. This here is Jack the Ripper from 1959. My buddy Jason from Horrific Nightmares actually reviewed this one during the Slashback Challenge, and swears it's definitely a slasher film. After watching it myself, I concur. Jack the Ripper from 1959 is a slasher, which means this was released before Psycho and before Peeping Tom. Now some of you might be thinking, well, Jack the Ripper, that's a serial killer film. Again, I say they're the same thing. I mean, is Michael Myers not a serial killer? Is Jason Voorhees not a serial killer? Just because Jack the Ripper is based off of the actual Jack the Ripper doesn't make it any less of a slasher. However, is Jack the Ripper the first slasher film? I'd say no. Let's go all the way back to 1920 and the movie that is considered to be the first ever horror film, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Cinemassacre recently did a 100th anniversary video for The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And in that video, James literally discusses whether or not the film is a slasher, or proto-slasher. Same thing. He ultimately decided, in his opinion, that it is in fact a slasher. And I tend to agree. Which made me wonder, is the very first horror film also the very first slasher film? In the movie, in case you haven't seen it, a hypnotist named Dr. Caligari uses his sleepwalking patient Caesar to commit murders. He stabs the victims in their sleep. Of course, it is a silent film, and it's a work of expressionism. But does that mean it can't also be a slasher? If the movie was made today with dialogue and followed the same storyline, I'm pretty sure most people would consider it to be a slasher film. But let's say you do disqualify it for being expressionism and for being a silent movie. Well, what's next? Let's jump ahead to 1931 with Fritz Lang's M. It's a movie about a child murderer with a body count. Is that not a slasher? I want you to keep all of this in mind when you see my slashback pick this week. There are those who also claim A Bay of Blood is the first slasher film as we know it. It was released in 1971, and it does follow that slasher formula we know and love. And then, while I don't agree, there are those who jump right to Halloween and claim that's the first traditional slasher film. To them I ask, what about Black Christmas from 1974? Or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? another film notoriously known as one of the first slasher films. But if you're going to acknowledge Halloween and Black Christmas, as you should, then you have to give credit to Silent Night, Bloody Night, which was released before both of those films in 1972. And both of those movies borrowed a lot from this one. So what truly is the first slasher film? We may not have a definitive answer, so let's briefly discuss what makes a slasher film a slasher film. Here's the movie that I know we can all agree is definitely a slasher. Friday the 13th. But let me ask you something. What if the killer in Friday the 13th didn't use a knife, or a bow and arrow, or any of that, but instead, what if she used a gun? Would Friday the 13th still be considered a slasher film if Mrs. Voorhees used a rifle? Does the killer need to use some sort of sharp object to kill victims for the movie to be considered a slasher? I mean, the word slasher does seem to imply that, but I don't think it's necessary. There are plenty of slasher films where victims are simply stabbed, not slashed, or killed by other weapons. Say hello to Don't Go in the House. Have you seen this one? I mean, it's universally considered to be a slasher, as is April Fool's Day. This is the movie I mention when people tell me a slasher film needs a body count. Well, what's April Fool's Day then? Going back to the weapon thing, Child's Play is another film universally considered to be a slasher. But despite the fact that Chucky is holding a knife on the cover, does he actually use a knife to kill anyone in the movie? Right off the bat, Charles Lee Ray is known as the Lakeshore Strangler. He's known to strangle people, not stab them, not slash them. Chucky kills Maggie with a toy hammer. He uses a gas stove to kill Eddie Caputo. He electrocutes the doctor at the hospital. He attempts to strangle Mike Norris. The only time Chucky uses a knife to kill anyone is when he stabs the voodoo doll. Look at the sequels as well. Chucky uses a variety of different weapons, and very few of them are a bladed object. Which brings me to The Terminator. This one is divisive on the topic of slashers. Some people consider it to be a slasher, others don't. I, for one, do consider it to be a slasher film, and only recently did I develop that opinion. I mean, it definitely plays out like a slasher. Arnold goes on a killing spree, murdering women named Sarah Connor. There's a definite body count. There is a final girl in Linda Hamilton's Sarah Connor. There is even a final confrontation and chase scene between the killer and the final girl. Plenty of other slasher films establish the fact that the killer does not need to be human. So right away, you can't use the excuse that it's a Terminator. The thing that divides people, I think, is the fact that he uses a gun. But like I said about Friday the 13th, if Mrs. Voorhees used a gun, would Friday the 13th still be considered a slasher? If the Terminator used a knife or another bladed object, would the people who don't consider it to be a slasher change their mind? If that's all it takes, can we all agree that Terminator 2 is in fact a slasher, since the T-1000 uses bladed objects during his killing spree? Chopping Mall is another divisive one. A lot of people consider this to be a slasher, as do I, and a lot of people don't. It just so happens that the killers are robots. Replace them then with human or even cyborg mall security killing people. Would it then be considered a slasher to those who don't consider it to be one now? Ultimately, I still don't think we have definitive answers to any of these questions, but it's fun to discuss. What makes a slasher film a slasher film? And what was the first slasher film? What do you think? Comment below and let me know. Thanks for watching, guys. Be kind, subscribe.